Hi everyone, Jason here from spiritualbabies.net. You've joined us for chapter 2 of the Book of Ruth. You can find a little link to chapter 1 under the video, and then a little thing in the corner there'll be a question mark pop up. We're being walked through this by Rabbi Joshua Neely, who did an amazing job last week, and Ruth 2 promises to be even more exciting than last week's, because Ruth and Naomi are somewhere now. They're going to be talking to other people. It's not just an introduction to the circumstance in the family.
Although I should point out, we're not walking through this. This is still a brisk jog. Walking through it would be to take each verse in much more detail and discuss all the different commentary and implications. But it's important to at least get a version down where there is a clear narrative and a sense of the text by itself, and then hopefully each person watching will go home and look up more resources to continue their study.
And if you've got questions about this we don't cover, then as soon as you can, drop me a message on Facebook or under the comment section here on YouTube, and maybe we'll do a return to a Ruth the sequel and cover some of those. All right, so chapter 2, verse 1. Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a man of substance of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Do we know what the relationship is between Elimelech and Boaz?
So there is it doesn't say explicitly, although we get a bit of a genealogy at the end of, of chapter 4. But it seems that they are, both descended from the similar ancestor. That's the word. That likely goes back to either Nachshon or Aminadab, according to tradition.
Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "I would like to go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain behind someone who may show me kindness." "Yes, daughter, go," she replied. So this speaks quite a lot to me. There's clearly guidance in the Torah about how to pick crop from a field, and that you kind of leave the corners for the poor. So I have to assume that either Ruth, after spending time with Naomi, understood the direction in Torah, or hoped, just lent on the goodness of the people, that she could go behind someone, because it wasn't her field, it wasn't her grain, and pick what was left over for herself.
So it seems to indicate that Ruth understands that there is a Torah commandment that that the poor should be allowed to glean. But what is so interesting here is, well, first of all, just a little issue with the translation. I believe you translated it as "I would like to go."
Yeah.
Right. So in the Hebrew, it actually is more of a request. I mean, I know that's how the English can also be read, but it's more like, I will go, please.
Okay. Can I go?
To a field. Right. Let me go, almost. So she's asking more permission rather than just saying what she's going to do for today. It's like if I say I'd like to go to the beach, that's very different than let me go to the beach.
Right. So
she is checking that what she's asking for is appropriate. But what's interesting is that she understands that there is this right that the Torah has given for people who are poor to go and to glean and to collect the fallen stalks and other things. But she's also aware that not everyone seems to observe this properly. Right? So she's looking for somebody who would actually be good to her, or more literally in the Hebrew, in whose eyes she would find favor. So she which does nothing to do with appearance. It just means that you have behaved in a way that the person now is willing to be gracious to you. So she both recognizes that there is this opportunity, but she also recognizes that it's not going to be 100% successful wherever she goes, because some people are not nice. And Naomi then gives her permission to go. So she is still being very deferential to her mother-in-law, and she is still trying to follow Torah, but she also knows not everyone in the land of Israel is actually following Torah the way they should. So she's going to look for someone who will.
Okay. And off she went. She came and gleaned in a field behind the reapers, and as luck would have it, does it say that in the text, as luck would have it?
It's not so luck is not the word that's used, but you might say, and it happened.
Okay.
Right? It's so there's definitely a sense of happenstance in the verbs. Like, and it happened to happen might be a way even to put it as a stronger sense of the chanciness of this. But yeah, the luck. I mean, that's a translator's choice, but it's definitely trying to give a sense of serendipity.
Okay, and as luck would have it, it was the piece of land belonging to Boaz, who was part of Elimelech's family. It was a bit of luck, wasn't it?
It was.
Presently, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem. He greeted the reapers, "The Lord be with you," and they responded, "The Lord bless you." So Bethlehem is it's a neon link there between Ruth and David. Do we assume then that Boaz's family home was Bethlehem?
Well, precisely. The thing is, in the ancient world, if you were of certain economic status, which most people would aim for, and even if you were sort of middle class and up, the chances were you lived in town and you worked in the fields. So he would have been, a resident of Bethlehem, and then he would have gone out to the field to oversee what was being done, since he is very prosperous. But if he was a regular kind of person, he would have gone out to the field to then work. So that was the normal model. I know in the sort of the American image of farmers, the idea is one little farmhouse and then all the fields, and then you go 5 miles and another little farmhouse and all the fields and you go 5 miles. But that wasn't the biblical model of farming. People lived together for security and then would go out to the fields to do the work.
So I did mention this before we recorded. I just wanted to say that I want to go off topic a little bit here and talk about the translation on chapter 2, verse 4, because in the English text, I've got "the Lord be with you," and they respond, "The Lord bless you." Now that kind of says to me, it rings actually of a Catholic church. At the end of every Catholic service, someone will say, "Peace be with you," and then everyone will turn around and say, "With you also," and it kind of feels like that kind of call and response. But in the Hebrew text underneath, I can see the name of God is used. So I'm curious as to why we don't have, because from my perspective right now, anyway, I might change my mind in 10 minutes. If Boaz had said the word Lord or something close to the word Lord, that would have been what was used. But it seems clear to me that he didn't. It seems clear to me that he used the name of God in the greeting and they used it back again, which seems totally against really what the tradition and teaching is today.
So you're touching on a lot of different topics.
Right.
Let's take them in order of least important to most important. So least important is, why does the translation use the term Lord rather than some other way of rendering that the word in the Hebrew is the Yud and He and Vav and He, the four-letter name of God. And quite simply, the translation does tell you that it is the four-letter name of God, because I am willing to bet dollars to donuts, but not during Pesach, that the Lord in your version is capitalized.
Absolutely.
All the letters.
Yeah.
Right. So that is a translator's convention that's been going for quite some time, that whenever the word is the name of God, they translate it as the Lord, since after all, in Hebrew, it is standard to pronounce that word as Adonai, which means the Lord. So they are translating the pronunciation of that word, and by capitalizing it, they are showing you that don't think this actually is the word Lord. Think of this as the substitute word for the Yud He Vav He. So they are indicating to an astute reader that in the actual text he used God's explicit name. If they'd wanted to say that he had been saying the word Lord, meaning like mastery kind of Lord, then it would have been written with lowercase letters. And that would have told the reader that he used the word actually Adonai with an Aleph, Dalet, etc., that was the word that was typed in the text. And you'll find that in other parts of the Tanakh, where the word, Adon is used in various conjugations and forms, and the English translation will simply render it as Lord, but with lowercase. So the text is trying to do that. Now, some other texts have a different convention. So, for example, in the latest conservative movement, Siddur, when they are trying to tell you in the translation that the Yud He Vav He is in the Hebrew, they actually write out in English Adonai, Adonai, I guess. So that's their way of telling you God's name is in the Hebrew at this point. I've seen other translations that will put in the English word Hashem, literally meaning the name, but they'll write it out in English, Hashem, to let you know that it is actually referring to God's explicit name. So as far as translations go, there are many different ways to let you know what the word is referring to, that it is referring to the explicit name of God, rather than the literal meaning of the word that's been chosen as the substitute in English.
So I guess the question is, why in your Siddur does it say something that Boaz was, or why is there a translation in your Siddur and in other stores? And actually, throughout lots of Jewish writing, why is there a translation for something that Boaz and his workers were quite happy to say out loud?
Okay, so why do we have a substitute at all? That's the real question. Why couldn't this translation translate the Yud He Vav He the same way as it translates Boaz?
Right.
If it's a proper name, which is really what Yud He Vav He is, why not translate it? Why not just render it in its phonetic form? We've got Ruth, we've got Naomi, we've got Boaz. There should be a phonetic version of the Yud He Vav He.
Especially whenever this happened, they were happy to be in a public place and pronounce it with their mouth to the ears of the other person who heard it, and then said it back.
Exactly. I mean, if we were trying to be a good court reporter, to take a full and accurate transcript of exactly what sounds passed out of Boaz's lips and what sound passed out of his reaper's lips, then we would want to render it in some phonetic alphabet as precisely as possible for what they said. So there's a couple problems with that. One is that we in the modern world do not have the precise phonetic way of pronouncing that particular name, and a wrong pronunciation is considered to be quite sacrilegious, and so we're not going to render that into a false or perhaps even blasphemous variation of what those four letters could be pronounced as, because as hopefully people who are watching will know, Hebrew does not include the vowels automatically. The vowels are implied by knowledge of the text, and that particular word, although you will find often vowels written for it, those vowels are already considered to be the substitute vowels to tell you which substitute word you should fit in that spot, rather than the original voweling that would have gone with that word when it was pronounced. So we don't have an accurate way of knowing precisely what it is. I know there are many people out there who peddle the idea that they know the true secret name of God, and no, that they don't. I mean, anyone who tells you they have the secret and it can be yours for 1995 is much more interested in the 1995 than they are about the secret. And that's just been true, forever. But the question then is, why were the people of Boaz's time period comfortable using Hashem HaMefurash, the explicit name of God, as enunciated as it is written, and why are we not? Well, mainly because of the past example, which is to say that as time went on, people would use God's name, the actual explicit name of God, which has an inherent sanctity to it, even if it's not being intended to be used in a sacred way. And they use that name in many non-sacred ways. We have examples of people swearing and using it in false oaths, and using it in insults and curses. And that type of abuse of God's name was considered to be a great shame and detriment to our nation. And so it was decided to not use it at all as it is explicitly pronounced. Because once it became in the vernacular, people would simply use it casually. Now, an example, although not parallel, is the English word God, which is not a sacred word, which is why there is no need to hyphenate it. We can have another discussion about the hyphenation fiasco, but the question then would be, well, look at what happened, though, with the word God. A lot of people, especially native English speakers who don't know another language and think of God only with the term, the English word God, have become very, very casual about how they use that word. So that word, which doesn't have any sanctity, thankfully, to it, is bandied about with reckless abandon, and is used in ways that we would certainly not want God to be associated with. And in fact, many people use it without even thinking about God as it passes through their lips. It's just a random exclamation or adjective that's used in many different contexts. If it was the actual name of God, then it would just be an absolute devastating abuse of God's name and the concept of God, all the more so, multiplied exponentially beyond what the English word God could possibly be. So I just wanted to give one last discussion or one last point on the idea of the explicit name, which is if we want to summarize why it is written the way it's written in the text that we're reading, it's basically because people are fools. And we can't be trusted with God's explicit name as pronounced. And the fact that I'm sure there are some people listening who are thinking, well, I could be trusted, I wouldn't cause any problem, is exactly the problem. Because everybody thinks they wouldn't misuse it, and no one recognizes that it is all of us who are breaking the speed limit every day, it is all of us who are insulting other people every day, whether it be at a major or minor level. We all excuse our version of how we transgress, and when you transgress by abusing the name of God of all existence, it is a different level and caliber of transgression. And it's something that can actually be set aside so that it doesn't happen. Most other things we can't set aside. I mean, we can't prevent everybody from stealing, from insulting, from murdering, from doing other things, because there's no way when we're just living a life to keep us from actually transgressing. But this is one thing that we can take off the table of possible transgressions. And we have. Now, in the future, God willing, the name will be returned to us when we are more responsible, but we're not there yet.
All right, good. Thank you for that. So 5. Boaz said to the servant who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose girl is that?" The servant in charge of the reapers replied, "She is a Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." So he's got a pretty good understanding of who should be working in his fields, and he spots a stranger.
Which is not, the Midrash, I just happened to love about this, picks up very quickly. Does Boaz often ask about girls?
I see. Okay.
That is not exactly the behavior of a good and proper gentleman. Who's that? We have to give an explanation of why is she drawing his attention when we know that he would not be going out and leering at the girls in the field. And the explanation the Midrash give is that she is behaving with modest and wise behavior. Specifically, she is following the precise practice of only picking up 2 ears rather than 3 ears of the wheat when she is gleaning, to show that she is both a modest person as well as knowledgeable of the law. So she is showing herself in multiple ways to be of exceptional caliber. And that is what draws his attention, not just because she is attractive.
And I guess she'd stand out because anyone that he's employing to be doing that job would have been in the first line, and she would have been following behind. So there would have been a definite distinction between her and everyone else.
And which is also nice that he knows his employees. He knows the people that he has hired to do this job. And he also knows, of course, as being a righteous gentleman, that the poor have the right to also come in and take the other sheaves. But he doesn't recognize this person, which means he knows his workers, he knows who the normal poor people are, and she's neither of them. So, and she's behaving knowledgeably and modestly. This is somebody special.
Has anything been said about the fact that, I mean, the line says she is a Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. I mean, there's no, he can't be mistaken there. And yet, there, as we mentioned last time, there's a definite kind of target on Moabites in the text and their inclusion in the house of Israel. Yet we've got this stranger to him. You might think that he'd say, well, you know, we don't want her sort around here, or
Israelites only.
That's right, yeah. It seems.
Well, what are we doing giving, you know, my extra property, which is only for the poor, to this Moabite poor girl, you know?
Yeah,
I don't want to support their poor people.
Yeah.
I only want to support our poor people. What happens if all the people from Moab come here and take all the stuff? What will our people... He doesn't do that. Exactly.
What did the Moabites ever do for us?
Well, actually, what did they do to us? But
right, yeah.
You know, and that's why the Torah is quite negative towards them. But no, he seems to be perfectly fine, and this is another way the Tanakh is telling us that this is all above board. She's not passing herself off as someone else. She is not hiding as somebody else. On the other hand, there is potentially here still a slight layer of stigmatization, because as the tradition has it, she has converted, and yet she's still being called a Moabite. Now, that's not entirely unprecedented. We also have Uriah the Hittite from the time of David, who also seems to have been, you know, fully Jewish, but is still being referred to as the Hittite, which was a non-Jewish nation. Go ahead.
We didn't cover this last week, and it only occurred to me afterwards. So there's a certain, I mean, I get to speak, and quite lucky, I get to speak to lots of different people, and they have lots of different opinions, and they'll have different walks. And one of the fond parts for people about Ruth is the fact that she wasn't part of the house of Israel, and she became part of the house of Israel. Now, I admit that the first time I really paid any attention to Ruth, I fell into that category of people who believed that when she married Boaz, she became Israel. And it hadn't ever occurred to me that she'd already been married to a Jew. And so, do we go into this story believing Ruth is a good Jewish woman? Or is that something that because it was in Moab it didn't count, or is it happen later on?
No, the actual belief is that she wasn't Jewish in her first marriage. Okay. Because if she were, then so would Orpah, her sister-in-law.
Right. Yeah,
and then why would Naomi have told her to leave?
And to go back to your gods.
Exactly. Right. So it is Ruth's declaration, and then her coming to the land of Israel. And presumably there was an off-camera formal conversion process, which is not complicated. I know it's become very complicated in the modern world, and many people take that as though it were always the norm. But conversion used to be a little bit more quick, if you will. It has a negative connotation. I mean, it wasn't that it was rushed, but as we talked about, Naomi explained what it meant to really be Jewish in all of its detail. So I should say in sufficient detail, and Ruth was still interested and game, and so the next time they came to a community with a mikveh or a stream or lake, they could have done the conversion, and it would have taken all of about 10 minutes.
Okay, interesting. Right. Sorry if you hear anything odd. It's my cat's prowling around. She keeps bumping her head against the microphone, and now she's trying to click the mouse.
Of course. So this is still the servants explaining to Boaz.
Right. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. She has been on her feet ever since she came this morning. She has rested but little in the hut. So there's a kind of a rest area then by the field for people to go into when they get too hot.
Exactly. I mean, this is incredibly painful and hard work. And there would have been a bit of a shade. I mean, they're calling it, a bite, but I personally envisioned this as being a sukkah. All right, that was what people built during the summertime harvests. Was they built a little sukkah, and that's where you would spend your breaks, or even for some people, they would sleep there so they could start as soon as it was morning on the next day's work. But she seems to be not taking that many breaks. She is very, very diligent.
Boaz says to Ruth, "Listen to me, daughter. Don't go to glean in another field. Don't go anywhere else. Don't go elsewhere. Just stay here close to my girls. Keep your eyes on the field they are reaping and follow them. I have ordered the men not to molest you." Nice of him to do that. "And when you are thirsty, go to the jars and drink some of the water that the men have drawn." So he's approached her now and given the direction to carry on doing what she's doing. Because it must for her have been terrifying. She's gone and asked permission from the people who were in charge on that day, but he's the big boss, the landowner. When he approached, she must have trembled a little bit to think that he might come over and say, "I don't want you here."
It was entirely a possibility, yes. He could have kicked her out at that point. But instead, he is not just not kicking her out, he is offering special compensation to her. Right? I mean, there was no right among the poor to have the water that had been drawn by other people. That was not part of what the Torah was offering. Now, of course, good people should make that available, but it does create extra work for the landowner, which means less work is being done for other aspects. So anybody who has to go and replenish the water is not out harvesting. So it is a loss to him, but it is, of course, a kindness to those that are there that are gleaning.
And he basically says, the girls are going to go from field to field, keep an eye on where they're going, follow them.
But stay in my fields.
Right.
When he's saying don't go to another field, he's not saying go to a different field of mine. He's meaning don't go to the field of another landowner, right? You can be taken care of here.
She prostrated herself with her face to the ground. And I think the root word for that movement is where we get the word worship from. I seem to remember.
Very, very often you'll get that translation, yes.
Right.
But it literally means, lay down, flat on the ground, face to the ground.
And said to him, "Why are you so kind as to single me out when I am a foreigner?" Boaz said in reply, "I have been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth, and came to a people you had not known before." We'll stop there. So it's not even her actions in the field as much as he's already checked her out. Someone said, "Oh, she came with Naomi," but he couldn't have got all that information from that alone.
No, and remember when Naomi came back to the town in chapter 1, everybody was like, "Is this Naomi?" And she's like, my life has been so hard, things have been so tough. And at some point they would have noticed the other woman standing next to her. So that connection there would have been very, very public knowledge, if you will. I don't quite want to use the term gossip, but she was making a public declaration. So Naomi and Ruth would have been introduced. Something of their story would be known by everybody else in town. So when Boaz is being told, "Oh, that's the woman who came with Naomi," it would have then, that's who she is. The connection would have been made in his mind from the backstory he already did know.
The grapevine. So yeah, so her previous action had already elevated her. So he'd have received a good report. We go into what looks like a blessing. "May the Lord reward your deeds. May you have a full recompense from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge." She answered, "You are most wonderful, my lord, to comfort me and to speak gently to your maidservant, though I am not so much as one of your maidservants."
I know many people are aware that when you read through the Bible, people are always saying, "I am your servant, your servant this, I am your servant." But what she is doing is one step greater in humility, which is saying, you have spoken to your maidservants so nicely, but I don't presume that I'm even one of your maidservants. Right? It's like saying, I'm not even worthy to be one of your lowly maidservants, and yet I'm already referring to myself in a lowly fashion, but I have to lower it even further.
Mm-hmm.
So she is being exceedingly humble in her conversation with him.
She sat down beside the reapers. He handed her toasted grain, and she ate her fill and had some left over. So he's really taken a shine to her. He wants, at least he wants to include her among everybody else who's working in his fields that day.
Absolutely. I mean, this is showing her great favoritism. Indeed, it's showing her chen. It's showing her this graciousness that she had talked about when she was first saying to Naomi, I'm going to go out and find somebody who might be gracious to me.
Mm-hmm. When she got up again to glean, Boaz gave orders to his workers. You are not only to let her glean among the sheaves without interference, but you must also pull some of the stalks out of the heaps and leave them for her to glean, and not scold her. So the instruction must have been that she can't take a stalk with seed on. She can only pick up the loose heads of whatever.
Well, exactly.
Grain.
I mean, once a stalk has been bundled and set aside, that's not a forgotten sheaf, which is what is most notably given as one of the gifts to the poor, or one of the property of the poor in the Torah. So what he's basically saying to the workers is deliberately forget extra sheaves so that she can get more than she normally would. Stack the deck for her so that she's able to get a lot more.
She gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about and now I'm always stuck with this. I want to say ephah of barley.
Ephah,
where I wasn't sure if there's a P or an F.
which is about 6 gallons. 6 gallons.
That's
the point. It's a huge amount.
That's
why Naomi is going to be like, whoa.
Okay, good for her. And carried it back miraculously. She must have the back of an ox. And carried it back to her with her to the town. When her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, I mean, my first thought would have been, those people in front of her are doing a terrible job. When her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and when she also took out and gave her what she had left over from eating her fill, her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be he who took such generous notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law, whom she had been working with, saying, "The name of the man whom I worked with today is Boaz." At that point, I assume Naomi thought,
Well, that's exactly what's going to be verse 20.
Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Blessed be he of the Lord," and again in capitals, "who has not failed in his kindness to the living or to the dead. For," Naomi explained to her daughter-in-law, "the man is related to us. He is one of our redeeming kinsmen." So I think you're going to have to explain, because I know it's covered in the Torah, but for everyone, what redeeming kinsman means.
So what we're talking about here with redeemers are someone who can perform levirate marriage, meaning that since Ruth's husband died without children, it is, according to Torah, the obligation of the next of kin, which would usually be a brother, but his brother is also dead, to marry her and to sire a child that will be considered the descendant of the deceased first husband. And in this particular case, Boaz is one of the people in line to perform that function, which means that in addition to finding somebody who is incredibly gracious and generous with taking care of the poor, they have also found someone who is taking care of the dead, which is why Naomi says, he's both good for the living and the dead. God is good for the living and the dead because he's taking care of us so we don't starve, but he's also taking care of the levirate need of your previous husband.
I like
if
this.
We can make this work right.
Right. I love this next line because it kind of shows that Ruth was interested in Boaz and excited about what had happened that day. It's very human. She's making, it's kind of when a kid comes home from school and the parent would say, how did it go? And I had a really okay day. And then it just blurts out, the teacher gave me a gold star. Ruth the Moabite said, he even told me, stay close by my workers until all my harvest is finished. So she's proud of her interaction.
Well, it's also saying that the interaction was positive. That, so yes, he blessed us with additional grain, and he said that I should stay there for the rest of the harvest. And so I don't need to go look for another field for next. I should point out, we didn't really cover this earlier, but it's an interesting literary device that's used throughout the Book of Ruth, is this term that they're using as stay close. Is actually better translated as cling. It's the same root word that's used for glue, for example, or the same phrase that we use for cleaving to God and cleaving to Torah. You'll often see that translation.
In Genesis, it says you shall cleave to him.
And that is exactly the word that's being used here, or the same root verb, which unfortunately a lot of translations don't use consistently. But this is the whole idea, that she is clinging to many different things throughout the story. So she is clinging to Boaz now, she is clinging to the workers, he told her to cling to the other girls, and of course she has chosen to cling to the Jewish people. So it is all about her attachment, which is a huge counterpoint to what Boaz said to her previously, when he was talking to her and said that, I've heard everything that you've done, and how you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth and came to a people you had not known before, which also sounds pretty familiar. That is the absolute unclingingness that was required of Abraham. Remember when God said, go to a land that I will show you, that, and leave the land of your father, the land of your birth, the land of your... Ruth has done the same. She is another Abraham. In the sense that she is coming from everything she knew, and now she is, clinging to something entirely different. And of course, she parallels precisely the travel of Abraham, in the sense that she left a world that was idolatrous, and she enters a place where she is now coming to God, becoming a monotheist. So she really is a very good repeat, the reboot, if you will, of with the female version of Abraham.
I hadn't considered that before. Very good. Okay. And Naomi answered her daughter-in-law Ruth, "It is best, daughter, that you go out with these girls and not be annoyed in some other field." So
the word that was translated as annoyed there is the same word that was translated as molested earlier.
Oh, wow.
It literally just means touch.
Oh, good grief.
But definitely there's a connotation of inappropriate touching.
Yeah, I'm getting this whole Carry On vibe. I don't know. Are you familiar with Carry On movies?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so for the American audience who probably don't, there was a series of movies in the late 50s, 60s and 70s that were really tongue-in-cheek, kind of rude, naughty films where the women were always being lusted after and the men were always really crude, and they were hugely popular in the 70s because it was the 70s. Okay, so
it's very much the Benny Hill style of humor,
right? Yeah, I mean you couldn't get away with it today. So she stayed close to the maid servants of Boaz and gleaned until the barley harvest and the wheat harvest were finished, and she stayed at home with her mother-in-law. And that is the end of 2.
Right, so again, we got the stay close, which is also the cleaving word again.
Oh, very good. Okay.
But barley and harvest and wheat harvest, that means we've gone all the way from some point after Pesach, which is when the barley harvest begins, through Shavuot, and now we're ending up at the end of summer.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Rabbi, for giving us your time.
My pleasure.
And you guys at home, don't forget, if you have questions about this, leave them under the video. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube. You can find much more Rabbi Neely on the link. He puts out at least 2 videos on his own every week. And we'll see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.